I didn't rehearse what I was going to say. I didn't need to. When the intercom buzzed that Saturday morning and I saw their faces on the little screen, my father's jaw set the way it always was when he expected to get what he came for. My mother dabbing at her eyes with a tissue she'd probably been holding the whole drive over. I felt nothing I hadn't already made peace with years ago. I pressed the button and asked, "Can I help you?" My mother's voice cracked immediately. "Sweetheart, please. We just want to talk." I let them in. Not because I forgave them, not because I was afraid of them, but because I had been waiting a long time to close a door that had been left swinging open since I was 22 years old, and I figured it was finally time. I was 22 and my husband's company started to fail. His name was Patrick. We'd been married 14 months. We lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in Portland, Oregon, and I was working as a medical billing coordinator at a clinic downtown while he ran a small logistics startup he'd built with 2 college friends. I thought we were going to be fine. I thought a lot of things back then. When the business started bleeding out, Patrick didn't tell me right away. He kept saying things like we're restructuring, and it's just a cash flow issue, and I believed him because I was 22, and I loved him, and I had no reason not to. By the time I understood what was actually happening, he had already taken out a second line of credit using our joint account as collateral, borrowed money from 3 separate people without telling me, and co-signed on a lease for office space we couldn't afford. The total came to just over $230,000. I found out on a Tuesday evening in March. He left a folder on the kitchen counter. I think part of him wanted me to find it, wanted someone else to carry it, and when I sat down and went through every page, every statement, every letter from creditors, I felt the floor drop out from under me. I called my parents that night. My father answered. I told him what had happened. I told him about the debt, about the accounts, about how Patrick was talking about filing for personal bankruptcy, and what that might mean for us. I asked if I could come home for a little while, just until I figured out what to do. There was a long pause. Then my father said, "You made your choices, Nora. You married him. We told you not to rush into it." "I know," I said. "I know. But Dad, I don't have anywhere. Your mother and I are not in a position to take on your problems right now." His voice was very even, the way it got when a conversation was over. "I'm sorry." He wasn't sorry. I knew that even then. I called back twice. My mother picked up the second time and told me quietly that my father had already gone to bed and that she agreed with him, that I needed to learn to handle things on my own, that they hadn't raised me to fall apart when life got hard. She said it gently. That was always how she delivered the worst things. Gently, like the softness of her tone made the words themselves something different. Patrick and I separated 4 months later. The divorce was finalized just before my 24th birthday. I walked out of that marriage with a car that was 7 years old, a box of clothes, and $11,000 in a savings account that Patrick hadn't known about because I'd been quietly setting aside $100 a month since we got engaged. I don't know why I did that. Some part of me must have known something. The first year on my own, I lived in a studio apartment in Northeast Portland. It was 480 square feet, and the radiator made a sound like a dying engine every night from October through April. I ate a lot of rice and beans and rotisserie chicken from the grocery store. I worked my regular job during the day and took a second job doing data entry for a small accounting firm 3 evenings a week. I was not glamorous about it. I was not resilient in any cinematic way. I was just tired most of the time and trying to stay in motion because stopping felt dangerous. But somewhere in those evenings of entering numbers into spreadsheets, I started to understand something. The accounting firm's owner, a woman named Judith, noticed I caught errors. Not just typos, structural errors, the kind that revealed how money was actually moving underneath what was reported. She started giving me more complex work. She started explaining things. She paid me more than she had to. I enrolled in a part-time accounting program at Portland Community College. Then I transferred to Portland State and finished a full degree in 3 years while working full-time. Judith wrote my recommendation letter. She told me later she'd written exactly 1 sentence, "Nora will understand your money better than you do." I was 29 when I passed the CPA exam. I was 31 when I left Judith's firm and took a senior auditor position at a mid-size firm in the Pearl District. I was 33 when a boutique forensic accounting consultancy recruited me and I said yes, without needing to think about it longer than a day. I was making good money by then. Real money. Not rich in a movie money, but the kind of money that means you never have to ask anyone for permission to live your life. I owned a condo in the Northwest District, with a view of the West Hills. I had a 401k that made me feel something close to peace when I looked at it. I had friends who had become the kind of family I'd stopped expecting my actual family to be. I had not spoken to my parents in 8 years, not out of bitterness really, or not only that. It was more like, at some point I stopped waiting for them to show up and started building my life around the fact that they wouldn't, and that life was good, and disturbing it didn't seem worth it. Then my brother called. His name is Kevin. He's 4 years older than me and we were never particularly close, but we weren't enemies either. He called me on a Wednesday afternoon and I almost didn't pick up because I didn't recognize the number. "It's Kevin," he said. "I know," I said, though I hadn't. He asked me how I was doing with the careful awkwardness of someone who hasn't spoken to you in years and knows it. I told him I was fine. I asked him why he was calling. He said he was calling because Mom had asked him to, because Dad had asked him to, because they wanted to talk to me and they thought I might be more likely to pick up if it was him. I told him I didn't know why they'd think that. He laughed a little, uncomfortable. "They want to reach out, Nora. They've been going through some things." I waited. "Dad's business," Kevin said. "The hardware stores." My father had owned 3 hardware stores in the Vancouver, Washington area for most of my life. They were never spectacular, but they were steady, and he'd always talked about them the way some men talk about their children, with pride that didn't leave room for doubt. "What about them?" I said. "They're in trouble," Kevin said. "They've been in trouble for a while. One of them closed last year. The other 2 are, it's not good, Nora, and there's some tax stuff." "What kind of tax stuff? I don't know all the details." "Dad doesn't really explain things." "No, he didn't. I knew that." "They were hoping you might be able to help," Kevin said. "Given what you do?" I sat with that for a moment. Given what you do. As if the decade I'd spent building a career in accounting was simply a convenience that had arrived, something I happened to have lying around that might be useful to them. "I'll think about it," I told Kevin. I didn't call back for 2 weeks, but I did think about it, more than I expected to. I thought about the night I called my father from that apartment in Portland, 22 years old and newly understanding how badly things had gone wrong. I thought about his voice on the phone. Even, flat, already finished with the conversation before it ended. I thought about what I had done with the years after that. Not because I wanted to make them feel small for missing it, but because I genuinely needed to understand what it had cost me and whether I wanted to spend any of what I had left on them. I talked to my closest friend, Diane. She has a way of saying very direct things in a tone that sounds like she's suggesting a restaurant. And what she said was, "You're not afraid of them, Nora. You're just not sure you want to bother." She was right. I wasn't afraid. I called Kevin back and told him I would come to Vancouver for a weekend. Not to fix anything. Not to promise anything. Just to look. My parents live in the same house I grew up in. 3-bedroom ranch on a quiet street in Hazeldale. The rose bushes my mother planted when I was in middle school are still there. Bigger now, a little ragged at the edges. My father answered the door and I was struck, as I always am when I see people after a long time, by how much older he looked. He was 71. He had the careful posture of a man who is used to standing straight and is finding it harder. My mother came out from the kitchen and hugged me. She smelled like the same hand lotion she'd always used. I let her hug me. We sat at the kitchen table. My mother made coffee. There was a plate of cookies she'd clearly bought that morning, still in the grocery store arrangement. My father didn't apologize. I hadn't expected him to. He talked about the business the way he talked about everything. Factually, without softness, as if the situation were happening to someone else and he was reporting it. One store had closed, the remaining 2 were losing money. There was a payroll tax issue from 3 years ago that had compounded. There were letters from the IRS. He slid a folder across the table to me. I recognized the weight of it immediately. The particular kind of folder that means someone's financial life has gotten very complicated and very serious, and they've been pretending for a long time that it hasn't. I opened it and spent 40 minutes going through it while my parents sat across from me and didn't speak. When I was done, I closed the folder and set it back on the table. "How long have you known it was this bad?" I asked. My father looked at the folder. "A while. Did you talk to anyone? An accountant? A tax attorney? We talked to the accountant we've always used. I kept my voice level. He should have told you to get a tax attorney involved at least 2 years ago. My mother reached over and put her hand on my father's arm. He didn't look up. The number was not as catastrophic as it could have been. The IRS situation was serious, but it was negotiable. There were programs, offers and compromise installment agreements, options that most people don't know exist because they're not in the business of knowing. The stores were a different question. One of them might survive with significant restructuring, the other one was probably finished. I told them this, plainly. My father nodded slowly. My mother's eyes filled. Can you help us? My mother asked. I looked at her for a moment. I thought about the phone call. I thought about the studio apartment and the radiator and the $100 a month I'd saved without knowing why. I thought about Judith's recommendation letter and the CPA exam and the view of the West Hills from my living room. I'm not going to do it for free, I said. My father's eyes came up. I'm a forensic accountant, I said. This is what I do professionally. If you want my help navigating the IRS situation and restructuring whatever can be restructured, I'll help you. I'll charge you what I charge any client. Which is fair, and less than what you pay the firm you'd have to hire otherwise. You'd charge your own parents, my father said. It wasn't really a question. You told me I'd made my choices, I said. Yes. There was a long silence. My mother looked at the table. My father looked at me, and for once in my life I couldn't read his face. All right, he said finally. I'll send you a contract on Monday, I said. I drove back to Portland that evening. The Columbia River was dark below the bridge, and the city lights came up slowly on the other side, and I felt something I hadn't expected to feel, which was not triumphant, not vindicated, not any of the dramatic things you might imagine. I felt like someone who had finally organized a room that had been messy for a long time. Orderly, a little tired, ready to move on to other things. We worked together for 7 months. My father and I spoke on the phone twice a week and met in person once a month. He had to learn to answer questions completely and promptly, which did not come naturally to him. I had to learn to separate the man sitting across from me from the man who had answered the phone that night in March 12 years ago, and to treat the file in my hands like any other file, which was both harder and easier than I'd expected. The IRS accepted an installment agreement that significantly reduced the total owed. One store was sold, not for much, but enough to cover the outstanding payroll taxes. The other one is still open. It will probably make it. My parents paid every invoice I sent them. My father always paid within a week. He never commented on the amounts. Toward the end of the engagement, my mother asked me to stay for dinner one night. It was October, and she'd made pot roast, and the house smelled like it had on Sunday evenings when I was a child. Kevin came too, with his wife and their 2 kids, and we sat around the table that had been in that kitchen my whole life, and it was mostly normal, which was its own strange thing. After dinner, my father and I were in the living room while my mother and Kevin's wife cleaned up and the kids watched something in the other room. He was sitting in the chair he'd always sat in, and I was on the couch, and it was quiet. I should have answered that call differently, he said. He didn't look at me when he said it. He was looking at the dark window. I let that sit. I wasn't going to tell him it was okay. It wasn't okay. It had been the worst night of my life, and his voice on the phone had made it worse, and I had carried that for a long time. But I also understood something that I hadn't understood when I was 22, that my father was a man who had learned to close himself off because he didn't know how to be open, and that learning that about someone doesn't erase what they did, but it changes the shape of it a little. I know, I said. He nodded once, slowly. We didn't say anything else about it. I am 35 now. I live in the same condo. I have the same view. I see my parents 3 or 4 times a year, which is neither close nor estranged, which is, I've decided, exactly right. I am not someone who forgives easily or quickly. I don't think forgiveness is something you owe people by default, regardless of how they're related to you. But I've also found that carrying a closed door around with you is heavy in ways that become harder to notice the longer you've been doing it, and that opening a door, even slowly, even on your own terms, even charging market rate, can make you lighter. My father's remaining hardware store will probably celebrate its 40th anniversary next spring. I might go. I haven't decided yet, But I might. The thing nobody tells you about building a life without the people who were supposed to be your foundation is that the building still happens. It doesn't look the way you planned. It happens in evening data entry shifts and community college accounting classes and a car that's 7 years old and the quiet $100 you save each month without quite knowing why. It happens in the people who notice you and vouch for you and write one sentence on your behalf that turns out to be enough. It happens slowly, and then it's just your life, and it's yours, and nobody can take credit for it except you. That's the part they came back to find, not me exactly. What I'd built, the solidity of it, the usefulness of it, the fact that I had become someone who knew how to solve the kind of problem they were in, and I let them find it, on my terms, at my rate. With a contract signed on a Monday, some people would call that cold. I call it the only honest way I knew how to let them back in, with something real between us, instead of the old story about what family is supposed to mean. The old story never did either of us much good anyway. I've thought a lot about what it actually means when someone says, "You made your choices." My father said it to me on the phone when I was 22, scared, and trying to figure out how to survive something I hadn't caused alone. He meant it as a closing statement, a door shutting. What he didn't understand, what I didn't understand either, not yet, is that those words were also a choice, his choice. And choices don't stop having consequences just because the person who made them has moved on and forgotten about them. That's not a spiritual principle, it's just arithmetic. Every decision you make narrows some futures and opens others, and the math keeps running whether you're paying attention or not. My father chose distance when I needed him. That distance is what taught me I could only count on myself. And counting only on myself is what made me someone who could eventually sit across from him with a folder full of his financial problems and know exactly what to do with it. He didn't create my career, but his absence created the conditions for it. That's the thing about cause and effect. It doesn't always look the way you expect. What I keep coming back to when I think about Nora at 22 versus Nora at 35 is that the difference isn't luck and it isn't talent. It's the decision, made quietly and without ceremony, to keep going anyway. To take the evening data entry job, to enroll in the community college program, to save $100 a month in an account nobody else knew about. None of those things felt significant when I was doing them. They felt like survival. But survival, done consistently and with enough intelligence applied to it, turns into something else over time. It turns into a life that belongs entirely to you. Judith used to say that the numbers don't lie. People lie, and the numbers show you where. I think that's true of more than accounting. The actual record of who someone is shows up in what they do when it's hard and inconvenient, and nobody's watching. Not in what they say about themselves, not in what they say about themselves, not in what they meant to do, but in what they actually did. My father meant well, probably. He thought he was teaching me something. What he actually did is in the record, and the record is what I had to work with. I don't tell this story to make anyone feel guilty. Least of all him. He's 71 and tired and his rose bushes are overgrown and he's doing the best he knows how, which is the most any of us manage. I tell it because I think there's something honest in it about what it takes to build a real life. You have to be clear-eyed about what you're actually working with, not what you wish you had. You have to apply intelligence to your actual situation, not the one you wanted. And you have to keep choosing every day to be the kind of person whose record you can read without looking away. That's it. That's all I've got. The rest is just showing up and doing the work.